Hi. So this is my National Reading Panel report reflection video. I was hired as a reading specialist for the first time in the 1999-2000 school year. I'm not sure if it was that year or the year after, but central office sent a copy of the report to myself and the other reading specialists that were in the building at the time. But it was just sent to us. We were never told what to do with it, what to not do. I had no idea as a new reading specialist what it was. So it sat on my shelf for a good 12 years. And then when I had to move classrooms, it got pitched. So I fully confess I had not read it until this class. Um, so some of the things that surprised me about the report. The first one was the recommendation of the panel to teach phonemic awareness lessons with letters. This goes against everything I have ever been trained on, read, any of it. Um, we've had extensive training on phonemic awareness in my building in the past year due to a new program. And we were explicitly told to never, ever, ever use letters with the phonemic awareness activities. The only visuals we should be using are manipulatives that the kids would use to kind of mark the separation of sounds or the separation of words within a sentence. A few years back, I was given letters training by our local IU, and the joke the presenter said was, you're doing phonemic awareness because you can do it in the dark. So that was kind of my go-to on whether my lessons were correct or not. The next surprising thing for me was the lack of a link between independent reading and reading achievement. Um, just as reading specialists, this just it feels like it goes against nature, goes against common sense. It just it's unnerving almost. um, but upon reflection, um, with some past programs, my district has had mandatory 30 to 40-minute independent reading times. We've since moved away from that. I'm actually fighting tooth and nail to have any independent reading. But anyway, when we had the longer stretches of independent reading time, we did have some third, fourth, and fifth grade students who didn't know their alphabet, who were still acquiring English. And so that was a really long time period for them to not read. We had other activities, we did other things with them, but I can kind of see the connection with kids who are at really beginning levels of reading. Um, One of the things that we are doing in my building to try and kind of combat that lack of a link or that lack of a connection is to bump up engagement. We have the students, after the independent reading time is over, we have them self-reflect on how engaged they were during that time period. And then we also have the teachers mark down their observations of how engaged the students were while they were doing their reading. I was also very surprised at the small number of studies that were included in this entire report and by each subgroup. The minority report at the end of the paper was actually pretty interesting on this aspect, and she said that the National Reading Panel was too stringent in their criteria for research inclusion, and that they should have broadened it a little bit more. And by being so stringent, they left out some good research. And I tend to agree with her. It was very big decisions made on very small amount of research. Um, so because I've been around for a while, I can remember this panel report coming out, the link between the report and the Reading First, No Child Left Behind grants. I was part of the team that wrote the grant for my building. And because of these grants, because of the report recommendations, this is when we began using DIBELS. As a requirement for the grants, you had to have some sort of assessment that would be given during various benchmarks throughout the year to track student progress. So we're still using DIBELS. It's not my favorite thing in the world. We base a lot of decisions on it that I think other criteria should also be considered, but I'm trying to move us in that direction. I really found a disconnect between the findings from the report and the creation of the National Common Core Standards. This kind of leads me to wonder if this panel report was referred to, considered in the room while the National Common Core Standards were being created, because there really does seem to be a bit of a disconnect between the two. Overall, I see a benefit for this sort of a national report, these sort of recommendations, guidelines, findings. Over the summer, I took the Brain and Its Development class, and one of the things that we talked about was the fact that there's some really, really good research about student learning, about the brain, that's not making its way into the classroom. I think a national scale report of this size might be a good tool to help to start to bring some good research findings into everyday practices in the classroom. I can't imagine undertaking something so large. The 20 years between the first report and now, there's been so much research, there's been so much advancement. I can't imagine what an undertaking that would be, but I do see the benefit in it. Okay, and hopefully if they redo this report, reading specialists will read it, unlike myself.